What's that? Who there? Whoa.
And so at some point, right, you decided you were going to leave Fountain and then start Italic. And I'd love to get into what happened, where you saw that unique insight there. But before we dive into that, for people that don't know what Italic is, can you just give like the 2 minute summary of kind of the vision for it and how you go to market today?
Yeah, so the quick story of Italic is today a membership that provides access to over 1,000 products that we design and develop ourselves, ranging from cookware to apparel to accessories to bedding. Nowadays, even to active products such as like ski goggles and weight sets. And our spin on it is that we went and found the same manufacturers as high-end brands, but we don't really monetize the products very much. So we sell them at a price that is typically maybe 50 to 80% less than what leading direct consumer brands would charge, and even more so compared to traditional incumbents. So that's kind of the consumer pitch. A lot of the actual work for Italic like happens underneath the hood. Like I mentioned, I come from a manufacturing family, and that I could go into the whole backstory there. But the most of our work and effort actually has been on the supply side, and really the kind of long-term vision of what we're trying to build is really a two-sided marketplace where we are the infrastructure and the pipeline that connects manufacturers directly to consumers around the world. And for manufacturers, we essentially want to empower them to become merchants of their own without having to take on a lot of the logistical, technical challenges of spinning up, let's say, their own brand. So, and then for consumers, hey, you can buy like really, really great quality, really well designed product, but at a fraction of the price point that so-called brands would charge. So yeah, that's a quick 2 minute summary on Italic.
Yeah. And so on your site, you have this really good breakdown, super simplified, but clear to understand, where you compare like the classic luxury retailer versus Italic. And you go through the steps of the process and really showcase that margin bloat and where it comes from. For people who are having trouble visualizing that, can you just run through like, when you completely disrupted, I would say, the luxury retail supply chain. So just give a highlight on that and why it's so powerful what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think I'd even take it one step further to say that I think for we started in so-called traditional luxury goods mainly because the value proposition is so obvious there, where one purchase you're going to save like hundreds of, if not sometimes even thousands of dollars in one transaction. But the supply chain is actually pretty common across like most consumer goods, aside from CPG, where like the multiples are a little bit, the margins a little bit thinner. But to put it in a very tangible example, let's say a manufacturer produces really, really great quality products for a range of high end clients, and let's say they make a shirt. Typically, a manufacturer margin is maybe 15 to 25% on top of cost of goods and labor. So let's say that shirt costs $16. In actuality, the manufacturer will take their margin, which might be, let's say, $3 to $5. So they might sell it to a brand for $20, but that brand will go and historically, what they would do is they would sell it to either a distributor or a retailer, who would then finally mark it up and sell it to the customer. In 2008 to like 2011, there was a whole group of early, what is now known as like direct to consumer brands that wanted to cut out the middleman. And at the time, the middleman was the retailer. So instead of paying for a retailer markup, which ranges typically from anywhere from 33%, like let's say 50% on the high end, the direct to consumer brand, because they were selling it on the internet, they could pass a little bit of savings to the customer. But ultimately, when you work on a brand model, you're still incentivized to price as high as you can, and then to continue to lower prices with your manufacturers as much as possible. You make money by marking up products, right? By buying inventory and selling it at a price that's higher than what you bought it for. And I think inherently the biggest, market maker, the biggest margin of all, is always with the brand. So the idea with Italic is essentially, hey, if we abstract away the brand and have the discipline to essentially commodify all of the or turn all of the other things that brands do, such as great customer service and fast shipping and having high quality product and merchandising, but we don't actually take that margin for ourselves, but instead empower manufacturers to take that for themselves. That $16 shirt that was sold for $100 in the traditional model and that's a conservative, number actually. It might actually end up being quite a bit higher, where the manufacturer is making anywhere from like $3 to $5 on that sale. In our world, we would still incur all of the logistical, payment processing, support, all the normal costs of doing business, but we don't take our margin, or at least nearly as much as a normal margin does, a normal brand does. But for our manufacturers, we try to double or triple their margins. So ultimately, even if we're doubling or tripling a manufacturer margin, taking a $16 shirt and turning the manufacturer margin from $4 to $8 or to $12, at the end of the day, to a customer, like, you might save quite a lot of money in that scenario. Might let's say shipping was another $10, like, we're talking about saving like 50% on a $100 sale, just by removing the brand. So obviously that's a very, very, very simplistic way of kind of showing the supply chain. There's a lot of other moving parts in there, but I think that's how we frame it in a tangible way.
Yeah. And so the reason I love it is because you guys are basically, in layman's terms, you're going to the same factories, the same manufacturers that are making Gucci, All Clad, Oakley. You're going to them and saying, "Hey, we want a super similar, if not almost the same product, and we're going to give you more money in exchange for you working with us, and we'll basically give you a direct route to the customer." And so I imagine that this in the early days lived and died by your ability to go to those manufacturers and do those deals. And so I'd love for you to talk about how did that work, right? Because in theory, the value prop it makes perfect sense for the manufacturers. You're tripling their margin and eventually giving them a direct access to the consumer. But I'm sure it wasn't as easy as that sounds. So, how
No
did
way.
how did that go? How did that go in the early days?
Yeah. One thing to quickly clarify as well, I think, like, we do have in-house design and development, so it's important to us that we try to strive for what we call like evergreen styles or design, but so we don't like push the bleeding edge of like what is trendy in the industry. But it is important that we respect what other brands have designed and developed over the years. I think on convincing the manufacturers, you're right that the first year in 2018 I personally met with at least 150 manufacturers in Italy, in the U.S., in China, and it was really painful. We only convinced like two or three at the end of the year to join the model, and the biggest reason why was because manufacturers are inherently extremely risk adverse, meaning they make money on cash flow, and as soon as they receive an order, they'll typically take 30 to 50% down as a deposit, and then the remaining they might even go and factor so that they get about like maybe 80 cents, 90 cents on the dollar. So they are really driven by cash flow, and the reason is like they have to go hire labor, they have to go purchase materials, they have to go purchase equipment for fulfilling these orders. So I think for a lot of these manufacturers, even to this day, it's like, hey, this model does not make sense to them. But I think where we found success was with, not younger factories, but the younger owners of legacy factories, specifically those who are maybe second or third or even fourth generation, owners, where they saw the future kind of headed towards the direction of being online. They saw the rise of a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands, and I think the irony is like, to a direct-to-consumer brand, they might feel like they're changing the world, but to a manufacturer, it's like, I don't care if you're a direct-to-consumer brand or like a 100-year-old brand. It's like, to me, you're just a client who places an order and hopefully will grow. But I think ultimately, for us, like, we were able to show them like, hey, if we're able to deliver on the premise of essentially offering what we call like private label in a box, and you trust us, and we can deliver against that promise, you're going to continue doubling down on our product, on our inventory, and prioritizing our production runs, because it's ultimately your capital at the table at stake. So yeah, that's kind of it took a long time. We've gotten a lot better at it over the years, and to anyone trying to do what we're doing, I would highly recommend you not do that and just try to join us. But yeah, it was a really painful experience.
Yeah, it does. To your point before, it seems like there's a lot of complexities going on under the hood, and you guys built a super smooth experience on the top. And that's the best brands do that, right? The consumer doesn't need to know what's going on behind the hood.